All right, welcome back, everyone. So, some big stories to go into tonight. So, I'm sure you're all double masking, thinking about getting your vaccines, locking down once again, and soon you may be able to take, in addition to all of that, a daily pill that they're going to be recommending in addition to the vaccines and the regular booster shots. And so Pfizer right now is rolling out stage 2 trials of this new pill. We're going to be talking about what that is and what they're talking about with it. Also, folks, the Taliban is now declaring that China is its main partner, as we've been discussing, which is going to be pretty interesting going forward. It pretty much confirms a lot of what we've been talking about here, and some interesting stuff going on with this. Now, that said, a lot more stories to go into. As usual, if you have any questions, leave them in the chat. Kobe Robs, you're asking the drink of choice tonight is? It's ginseng tea, good old-fashioned ginseng tea. Yeah, folks, again, we're on the halfway mark. We'll go into questions, so if you do have questions, leave them in the chat. Before we get started as well, we're still totally demonetized by YouTube, and so if you want to support Crossroads, we do have Donor Box, which you can find a link to in the description below. But we also have Epoch TV. That's epochtv.com/Crossroads. And put the / on there so Crossroads gets some props for it. This is our uncensored video platform. We have a lot of shows. Crossroads is on there. We have our exclusive interviews and special features. We're also starting to get movies. So some great stuff, a lot of different shows. That's Counterculture, Dinesh D'Souza's Daughters on there, American Thought Leaders. Great shows on there, folks. Check it out. All you need, if you don't have a subscription yet, all you need for a free trial is an email address. So check it out. That said, I'll show you a quick trailer we're working on now because the next episode of our History of Communism series is coming out. That's the Dark Origins of Communism. I'll show you a quick trailer now of what we're working on. Communism is a belief in the destruction of belief. It destroys religion wherever it goes. So who is the unholy father of communism? Francois Noël Gracchus Babeuf. The French Revolution would be remembered for its unjust bloodshed, killing over 300,000 people. It was a period known as the Reign of Terror. All right, folks, again, that's the next episode coming out this Saturday, so be sure to tune in for that. It's going to be exclusively on Epoch TV. I have a lot more episodes coming out as well. We're working on a lot with it. And that said, folks, good to see you all here. Yeah, Lug Puka said, can't wait. And good to see you here as always as well. Elizabeth Tudor, communism equals Satanism. Actually, it's not far from the truth. If you go into the metaphysics of it, it's very similar. God, geez, I could do a whole series just on that alone, honestly. Shannon Haney said, Josh is, I appreciate it. James California said, without the pill, you could get ill. Then maybe that'll be a slogan. Speaking of which, folks, let's jump into the first story for the night. And here it says, Pfizer doses its first patient in phase 2 out of 3 trial for daily COVID-19 pill. This is the new daily pill that they're going to be rolling out for COVID-19, which they're going to be recommending you take in addition to the vaccines, possibly in addition to the booster shots if they make that official here, and some countries are already doing it. And in addition, very likely to the mask mandates, because the CDC says even if you're vaccinated, you still need your masks or your double masks. It's kind of what they're saying. Now it says here, Pfizer revealed on Wednesday that it gave its first dose to a patient participating in its phase 2 out of 3 clinical trial examining the efficacy of an orally administered drug that is designed to combat COVID-19. The CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla, on Wednesday night wrote on Twitter that, quote, success against COVID-19 will likely require both vaccines and treatments. Hear that, folks? They're now saying in addition to the vaccines and in addition to the booster shots, because they're also recommending booster shots, you also need treatments in addition to those in order to defeat COVID-19, they're saying. And he has said also the pharmaceutical giant, this is Pfizer, quote, started a quote phase 2 out of 3 study of our orally antiviral candidate specifically designed to combat SARS-CoV-2 or this CCP virus in non-hospitalized low-risk adults. In other words, if you're healthy. If you're healthy, essentially, you're not hospitalized, you're low risk. They recommend this daily pill for you to take. Now, the drug, which has been dubbed PF07321332, is designed for COVID-19 patients who haven't been hospitalized, but who have symptoms of the virus. So not fully healthy, but symptoms, but are at low risk of seeing it progress to become a severe disease. Now, earlier this week, continuing a bit further into the story, earlier this week, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has given some background on why they're pushing this through right now, the CDC, said that the vaccine's efficacy for keeping people out of the hospital has dropped. In an update, the agency said that against the Delta variant, the vaccine's effectiveness at keeping people out of the hospitals was between 75% and 95% in July, which is a drop from 97% in June. So it used to be 97%, now it's 75%, they say. Now, it comes as the American Medical Association, the AMA, called for immediate end to the use of ivermectin, which is the one that people were recommending for a bit. So the AMA, the American Medical Association, is calling for the immediate end to people using ivermectin to treat COVID-19, and for doctors to stop prescribing it after podcast host and comedian Joe Rogan confirmed that he took the drug in a combination with other medications to treat COVID-19. And they're saying this: we are alarmed by reports that outpatient prescribing for and dispensing of ivermectin have increased 24-fold since the pandemic and increased exponentially over the past few months. This is, again, the American Medical Association saying this today on Thursday. Ivermectin has been labeled a horse dewormer, as they're calling it, by some mainstream media outlets, but it's kind of a false label. The drug has been used for decades to treat river blindness and intestinal roundworm infections in humans. So yes, they use it for animals. They also use it for people, but the mainstream media has been calling it simply a horse treatment, basically. Now, over the course of the pandemic, some doctors have prescribed it for COVID-19, and several Indian states in India have also authorized the drug's usage to treat the virus earlier this year. So, well, folks, so you hear that. Be sure to not take ivermectin. But look forward to your new Pfizer daily pill in addition to your vaccines, your regular booster shots, and your double masks, as they're recommending. So you be the judge, of course. All right, folks, a lot more to go into with this, especially when it comes to the efficacy of the virus, because in Israel right now, some interesting stuff is happening. On two sides of this, on one side in Israel, they're talking about mandating now the booster shots. Now, keep in mind, Israel was kind of leading the charge with getting people vaccinated. Now they're putting up travel restrictions in Israel from other countries because they have such high infection rates. They have about 60% of people in the hospitals with serious COVID-19 symptoms who have been vaccinated, meaning that in Israel, frankly, people who are vaccinated have been seen to be more likely to have serious symptoms. Although it's hard to say because the majority of people percentage-wise were vaccinated in the country, so it's hard to say. But some interesting stuff with that I'll be going into in just a minute. First of all, folks, though, again, we're totally demonetized by YouTube, but we luckily do have sponsors, and tonight's episode is brought to you by Secure. Now, there's over 155 million Americans who are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the past year. People get anxious because they can't protect their data online or their activity online. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security when you're sending emails and sending messages. Secure's server and data centers are hosted in Switzerland. This is important because Switzerland is not held to the Intrusive Cloud Act. Switzerland also has the most secure data privacy laws in the world. Even if a foreign government, like the United States in this case, were to request data from them, your data, there's a lot of roundabout ways they have to go for it. Because Switzerland, again, they have the Swiss banking system, which has a lot of built-in privacy, let's say, protocols. And those privacy protocols apply to other laws within the country as well, including with programs like this. Now, Secure is the only private and secure messaging and email app that does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which again means it's not subject to the American Cloud Act, which any U.S. technology would be subject to, meaning that, well, the government can access your data. Now, Secure does not ask for your phone number, does not mine your data, and does not upload your contacts like all other chat applications of this nature do. The Secure Messenger functions by adding people you know and adding their secure numbers. You can also still chat with users who don't have Secure just by sending them an invite. And this way you're protected from hackers getting into your phone. You also have full privacy on the app. Now, if you want to try it out, it's $5 for the Messenger and $10 if you want both the email and Messenger package. You can visit secure.com today. That's SCKUR.com to get a free 7-day trial. If you want to try it out as well, sign up. You can get a 25% off discount using the promo code Joshua. So big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring tonight's episode. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into what's happening with COVID-19 in Israel, because, Israel was really leading the charge. Israel was the example country. I mean, it's ironic. It's kind of like when, socialism was spreading through Latin America and all the socialists were talking about Venezuela as the great model for socialism. Everyone said, look at Venezuela. They're leading the charge with socialism. Look at all the great things they're doing in Venezuela. And as soon as it failed, they said, oh, that's not socialism there. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. Don't look there. Now, the same thing is actually happening with Israel with the vaccines, because Israel was leading the charge with getting people vaccinated. They were opening up. It looked like things were really improving there. And suddenly, the virus came back and is hitting them pretty hard. Israel's now bringing back lockdowns. They're bringing back the vaccine mandate, the vaccine passports. And they were one of the first countries to have them. They're also seeing that people, again, as I just mentioned, people who are going into the hospitals with severe symptoms, not just being hospitalized for whatever, about 60% of them are vaccinated. Now, again, the percentages are important to note. There's important to note a footnote here is that, again, you had the majority of the country vaccinated. And so percentage-wise, you could say that maybe it's still like 50-50-ish. Keep in mind the CDC in the United States is saying that basically hospitalizations, they're saying symptoms are not as bad if you've been vaccinated. But they are saying hospitalizations, it's about the same whether you're vaccinated or not. But Israel's doing something interesting now, which is this. It says here, COVID-19 vaccine passports. In other words, if you've gotten your vaccine passport, you've been vaccinated, it expires 6 months after your second dose, as the booster shot is now being mandated. Now, again, keep in mind that Israel was kind of the model country for dealing with the virus. They were the one leading the charge with vaccinations and leading the charge with these vaccine passports, at least outside of China. Now they're saying that they're mandating the booster shot. So you have to have the booster shot in Israel now if you want to keep your vaccine passport. It says here, Israeli government officials said that COVID-19 vaccine passports will expire 6 months after the second Pfizer dose, meaning that people will need to receive booster shots to keep their passes valid. And keep in mind, folks, this is Pfizer. This is not some Israeli-specific vaccine. This is the vaccine they're doing here. And so they're mandating the booster shots, meaning if you get vaccinated and you think you're in the clear, you're going to need to keep getting your booster shots. And we'll see if they replicate the same model here in the U.S. They're probably not going to do it immediately because they're still trying to get people to take the first shots here. But in Israel, they're already making it like this. It says here, this week, the Ministry of Health in Israel announced the controversial move and declared that a person is considered fully vaccinated if they were, quote, vaccinated with 2 vaccine doses within 6 months from the date of the second vaccination. A very clever way of saying you need 3 vaccines. You need 3 shots. Listen to this play on words. You're in the clear if you've been vaccinated with 2 vaccine doses, meaning you've had both doses that you need, but within 6 months from the date of the second vaccine. So you take your second vaccine, 1, 2, and then 2 months from the second one. What does that form, folks? That's 3, meaning the first 2 vaccines and then your booster shot. A very clever play on words to try to make it sound like 3 is 2 in this case. Now, it says here, if they receive 3 vaccine doses, if they have recovered from COVID-19 within 6 months of the, quote, issuing date of the certificate of recovery, which is interesting here because this is one of the things they're not doing in the U.S. They're actually recognizing antibodies, natural antibodies. But they're saying it has to be within 6 months of having been issued your certificate of recovery from the virus. And so you have to be officially recovered from the virus. You get a certificate that's valid for 6 months. And that's how they're doing their vaccine passports there. And that has to be, again, right, or individuals that were recovered from COVID-19 and received at least one vaccine dose. And so they're having things all over the place. And they said this, from today, the third dose is available to everyone. This is the Israeli Health Ministry director saying on Sunday, August 29th, according to the Times of Israel. The vaccine passport is required to access a number of different venues there, including restaurants, theaters, and bars, just like similar to the New York, for example. France, Italy, as well as cities such as New York City and San Francisco have also implemented similar mandates in recent weeks, which have been triggering concerns that some such systems would create inequality between those who are vaccinated and those who are not. Now, in Israel, the vaccine passport applies to anyone over the age of 3. 3-year-olds. If you're 3 years old or older, you have to get these vaccine passports there, meaning you have to get not just your doses, the normal ones, but again, your booster shots. And since young children cannot get COVID-19 vaccines, they're saying, under the age of 3, they have to prove their COVID-19 status by using an antigenic test. Now, that's the Israeli model, and keep in mind, they were leading the charge with it. Interesting thing here, too, despite them doing this, despite leading the charge with getting vaccines, briefly, Sweden is now banning travelers from traveling to India, which is from Israel, which is again one of the most vaccinated countries. There are other countries now banning people from traveling to Israel because of the large number of people who are getting infected there, despite being the country that was leading the charge with vaccinations. Now, folks, let's switch topics a little bit. We'll talk about what's happening with Afghanistan because something interesting is going on right here. Remember how we were talking about the Chinese Communist Party inviting a delegate from the Taliban to visit China? Right before the Taliban suddenly launches this essentially charge across the whole country, when there were reports coming up locally among among the Afghan army fighters, saying that they were getting stand-down orders as the Taliban was taking over. And the letter from the call, it was reviewed by one of the mainstream media outlets. There was a letter between President Joe Biden, and the former Afghan, well, I don't know if he's still current, but the Afghan President Karzai before he fled, giving some interesting details, which is that the Afghan president was actually telling Joe Biden that they were aware the Taliban was planning an attack and that there were many fighters coming from Pakistan, meaning this was not just some random Taliban attack. This was well planned. Pakistan was involved in it, and just so happens that China invites this delegate from the Taliban to go visit. So they knew this was happening. They knew it was coming. They were warned about it, and, well, they didn't do anything to stop it at the very least, but we'll see what happens with it. Now it's coming out that the Taliban is announcing that China, the Chinese Communist Party, is their main partner. Let's go into it. It says a Taliban spokesperson has praised Beijing as a main partner and financer. So the CCP, they're saying, is financing the Taliban as the group moves to build a national governance and develop Afghanistan's economy. And they said this: China is our main partner and represents for us a fundamental and extraordinary opportunity because it is willing to invest and rebuild our country. I'll explain why this is interesting in just a minute. That's according to Taliban spokesperson Zubullah Mujahid, who told an Italian newspaper La Repubblica on September 1st. Now, China has offered many countries extraordinary opportunities in rebuilding and investing. What do we call that, folks? It's the One Belt, One Road Initiative, which is a debt trap. The CCP gets countries involved in debt traps, and the Taliban's about to fall into it. Interesting to watch them do this because many other countries have already learned their lessons with this. You look at what happened in Sri Lanka. Basically, what the CCP does, they give these countries deals where they want to build their infrastructure. The jobs don't go to locals. They go to Chinese workers typically, almost always. The CCP afterwards typically runs the facilities, meaning, again, that they don't go to locals. The construction's done by Chinese. They're Chinese mega projects, just like they build the ghost cities in China. They get all the money from it. They control it. And then they make basically predatory loans that they can't pay back. When the country defaults on the loans, the CCP gets a whole bunch of other assets in addition to that. And so the Taliban's about to fall into a Chinese debt trap, and the Taliban spokesperson is saying that China is our main partner and represents for us a fundamental and extraordinary opportunity because it is willing to invest and rebuild our country. This is going to be interesting, especially given the fact, I mentioned before, there were several Taliban factions actually active in Afghanistan. I think I mentioned 6 before. I believe it's actually 5 different factions within Afghanistan. And 4 out of the 5 don't seem to represent the one that's working with the CCP. And they don't actually know which one's even in charge based on some of the reports coming out. In addition to this, the Taliban faction in Pakistan is even attacking Chinese assets, which is quite bizarre, meaning that if the CCP does something to them, or the CCP is engaging with them and the CCP is in their building infrastructure, you can count, folks, on these other factions possibly attacking Chinese assets. Because, again, they have them operating cross-border, Tajikistan, Pakistan, Balochistan, terrorist groups that are very, very much opposed to the CCP right now. And again, these are tribal regions that don't fall within the normal country boundaries as we know them, like Pakistan and Afghanistan even, because the Pashtun territory, many of the Taliban are of the Pashtun region or tribal region. They don't like the CCP. Again, this is between Pakistan and Afghanistan. In other words, the CCP is about to get itself involved in a very complicated area and is very likely to cause a lot of trouble for itself in doing so. That said, actually, we have a great interview coming out, I believe, tomorrow with Bill Gertz talking about this. Bill Gertz, of course, one of the top China experts. Oh, no, sorry, we just published it. Check it out, actually, if you want more information on this. That's on Epoch TV. We also have a longer version of it on the YouTube channel here. So check that out if you want more information on that. Now, a bit more on this, though. They said the money has been a pressing concern for the Taliban after the United States blocked the group from accessing billions of Afghan assets that were being held in U.S. bank accounts. And the World Bank and International Monetary Fund have each suspended funding to Afghanistan. We'll have to see where that does go, because the Biden administration is talking about the possibility, they're not saying they're going to do it, but they are talking about the possibility of working with the Taliban in the future. And keep in mind, this is not a partisan issue. Even Trump was talking about engaging diplomatically with them going forward, but I don't think Trump was anticipating on the Afghan army retreating and the Afghan government falling. Interesting note here is that they've been framing this as being kind of a fluke, unforeseen incident. The recently released transcript and call or audio recording from Biden's meeting with the Afghan president is very telling, though, because, again, the Afghan president was telling Biden that they knew that Pakistan was basically, as they called it, they claimed, Pakistan denies it, but infiltrating essentially the Taliban to make this takeover. And again, China has huge control in Pakistan. Now, this said, there's an interesting development with this, which is actually, I'll give my analysis on it. I think it's actually a very clever move by the United States. We'll see how it plays out, because, again, you're dealing with a lot of unconventional war tactics. There's going to be a lot of disinformation. There's going to be a lot of fake attacks and framings of these, and they're going to use it basically to try to go after one country or the other. But it says here the Biden administration is now helping secure Tajikistan's border with Afghanistan. Now, all right, I won't get too deep into the geopolitics of this, because I've talked about it in a couple episodes before. Basically, the Chinese Communist Party has recently put a new CCP representative in East Turkestan, that's Xinjiang, which the CCP claims ownership over. That's the area where the Muslim Uyghurs are. The CCP is launching a genocide against them. And the CCP is also putting very, very strict social controls there. Now, as they're doing this, they're trying to make basically a road, this Belt and Road Initiative going through this region. And for the CCP, this is a very crucial region in terms of expanding their borders, so to speak, trying to build this One Belt, One Road Initiative, New Silk Road, or One Belt, Road Initiative, what I call it, into Europe, and also going through Xinjiang, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, eventually Pakistan, and Balochistan, which is a breakaway region from Pakistan, which Pakistan claims ownership over, and which has a lot of separatist fighters going after CCP assets. In Tajikistan, you have similar issues where you have terrorist groups basically launching raids on these Chinese transport trucks. And so the CCP is dealing with terrorists actually attacking their assets in Tajikistan. And meaning that, the government's kind of tolerating the CCP, they're kind of working with them, but they're also not interested in basically fighting terrorists on behalf of the CCP. It's been the same thing that they're dealing with in Pakistan as well, where again, you have this breakaway region in Balochistan, where you have terrorist fighters attacking CCP assets as they're trying to build things there. And the CCP is actually blaming America on this. It's very bizarre. And they're trying to get Pakistan to fight this terror war. And very likely, you're going to see the same thing happening in Afghanistan, where they're working with one faction of the Taliban, but you have, again, at least 5 factions there. And not to mention another faction in Pakistan that's already attacking CCP assets. So this is an interesting move by the Biden administration. Let's get into it. It says here, Biden administration helps secure Tajikistan's border with Afghanistan. And it says the United States will help build new border facilities in Tajikistan along the Central Asian country's border with Afghanistan to respond to potential terrorist or other security threats, said the U.S. Embassy in Dushanbe this week. The facility will be constructed in Tajikistan's southern tip and will replace an old facility to allow border guards to deploy forces more quickly to border areas in response to threats, according to the embassy there. Over the past 20 years, that about $300 million has been provided to Tajikistan to secure its border with Afghanistan. This is a quote from the ambassador there, who said the United States and Tajikistan enjoy strong security cooperation, and this border detachment project is just another example of our shared commitment to the security and sovereignty of Tajikistan and Central Asia. According to the embassy's statement, the United States is partnering with the United Nations to construct the border facility in Ivaj, with the project scheduled to break ground next year. Tajikistan, which has pledged to accept 100,000 Afghan refugees escaping the Taliban, also hosts a Russian military base and is a member of the Moscow-led post-Soviet security bloc. Moscow has reinforced its military base in Tajikistan, and its forces are holding a month of exercises near the border with Afghanistan. Now, a couple important points to watch with this. We don't yet know if this is going to be essentially a good thing or a bad thing, basically. But a few important points with this. First of all, depending on how the U.S. uses this. Now, the Biden administration, and we'll see how it turns out, right? We'll see how closely they follow this. Biden himself said that he justified pulling U.S. troops out of Afghanistan because he wants to focus the U.S. military more heavily on large threats, Russia and China, but mostly China, which is actually, if you understand how the CCP has been using Afghanistan, is actually maybe a good move, although I don't think, this is my opinion, I guess. I don't think totally abandoning Afghanistan was a smart move, especially based on what's happening now. And especially because they were depending on us, right? They were relying on us there, my opinion. But in terms of actual threats to the United States, actually, the CCP has historically been trying to keep the United States essentially busy in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And so, in the CCP's eyes, the U.S. troop presence in Afghanistan was seen as the United States putting American soldiers at the border, on the border of China. They viewed this as almost a U.S. incursion into the bordering area of China. That's how they saw it, that the U.S. was surrounding China. Because, again, we have assets in, we're, of course, supporting Taiwan. We, of course, have military assets in the Pacific, the Asia-Pacific region. That was under Barack Obama's Asia Pivot, where we moved a lot of the U.S. Navy to the Asia-Pacific region, which was in response to China. And so in the view of the CCP, the America was surrounding it. They said we were surrounded on all sides by enemies. This is how they viewed it, right? Now that if the U.S. does move troops to Tajikistan, it's actually even closer to China. This is for the CCP an even closer move to its borders, and could be interpreted by, within their thinking, could be interpreted basically as the U.S. reshuffling its military focus to be more focused on threats from China. So this will be interpreted by them like that. The other possibility with this, though, and the other important part to watch as this unfolds, is to what extent will the U.S. basically maintain this? Is something to challenge China? Will it be actually focused on anti-terror operations there, meaning that we're going to be protecting maybe even Chinese assets? That's the other possibility with this. And of course, partnering with the United Nations to construct the border facility is also very telling, because the CCP has a lot of influence over the United Nations. And so if basically the CCP, well, I mean, again, this is just analysis and speculation, so take it for what it's worth. But if the CCP is working through the United Nations to basically create its own border force, anti-terror force, to essentially protect its own assets, because the CCP's assets in this One Belt, One Road initiative are being attacked by terrorists in Tajikistan, then that's going to go the other way. In other words, this can go either way. It's either going to serve the U.S. interest of helping basically keep U.S. troops or U.S. assets or military assets at China's door to help challenge their interests, or this is going to be, CCP pulling strings to basically use the United Nations and maybe even the United States to protect its own assets and fight a terror war on its behalf, which would be probably a bad thing. We'll have to see how it turns out, of course. And again, it's interesting watching this unfold. Now, I want to go a bit more into what's happening with China and how they're talking about the United States. Because right now the CCP is accusing the United States of suppressing China, and the meaning of their language is actually different than what appears on the surface. I'll get a bit more into this in a bit. First, though, folks, I want to go over some questions. So if you do have questions, leave them in the chat right now. It's around the halfway point, so we'll go into them. First, though, folks, I want to show you again a quick trailer. We're working on Epoch TV because we have some great interviews coming out. And again, Epoch TV is our uncensored video platform. We have all of our exclusive interviews for Crossroads there. We have our special features, and there's a lot more in the works. Some real good stuff in the works I'll tell you about soon, hopefully. We also have a lot of other shows there. We also have now Epoch Cinema, where we're going to be getting movies and so on there as well. So check it out. That's epochtv.com/Crossroads. That's a great way to support Crossroads too. And if you want to go the extra mile, you could please tell a friend or family member about Epoch TV. I'll show you a quick trailer now we're working on. The United States is withdrawing from Afghanistan, but as it happens, the Chinese Communist Party is moving in with diplomatic relations with the Taliban.
美军撤出阿富汗表明，肆意对他国进行军事干涉，只会以失败收场。
Strategically, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the collapse of the U.S.-backed Afghan government in Afghanistan is a success for China.
Part of the reason for the U.S. withdrawal is to refocus the U.S. military on bigger threats.
We have to shore up America's competitiveness to meet these new challenges in the competition for the 21st century.
Having U.S.-backed troops on its western border is a major threat to the Communist Party. China wanted to get the United States out of Afghanistan, and for that reason, it's a strategic success for them.
All right, so that's our new interview with Bill Gertz, one of the leading experts on China. Great interview talking about Afghanistan and how it relates to the Chinese Communist Party, and especially what the CCP is getting itself into, basically by siding with one faction of the Taliban while other factions are actually opposed to it. There's a lot of nuances and technicalities to this that are very complicated. Bill does a great job explaining a lot of this. You can check out part of that interview on the YouTube channel here. The full interview is on Epoch TV, but the one we have on YouTube is pretty good too if you just want to check that out. That said, we have a great interview also coming out tomorrow, also on Epoch TV and some of it on YouTube. It's going to be with retired Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann. He's a retired Green Beret, and he's the guy who's doing Task Force Pineapple, as they're calling it, which is the citizen movement. These are American citizens and veterans who have been basically creating an underground railroad helping people get out of Afghanistan. It's an incredible story he has to tell. That's going to be premiering tomorrow, so stay tuned for that as well. All right, that said, folks, let's go into the questions for the night. Let's see. First off, we have, and again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. But first off, we have Spark and Clark. You said, are we supposed to believe that the Taliban checkpoints had no idea that a couple ISIS-K bombers were on the way? Yeah, I don't believe it myself personally. You said Americans can't get to the Kabul airport, but ISIS-K can, and the Taliban is our ally? Yeah. Well, and in addition to that too, remember we discussed that the Taliban they were the ones who let the ISIS fighters out of prison, thousands of them. Now, there have been cases of the Taliban fighting against ISIS in the past, but again, it's complicated. You can't just look at the surface picture because you have several factions of the Taliban, even just in Afghanistan. You have at least, I think, 5 different Taliban factions. You also have other factions in other countries. Same with ISIS. You have a lot of different factions. One of the reasons why Afghanistan is called like the graveyard of empires, the tribal conflicts are very hard to navigate. And even between the same groups, you have tribal factions that don't get along. On that note, though, again, on your note that, again, these ISIS-K bombers, the suicide bomber who was able to get in and kill 13 U.S. service members and kill, I believe, over 60 Afghanis who were trying to escape at that airport, was able to get through the Taliban checkpoints. And very strange incident, given also that the Biden administration launched a couple airstrikes against potential, what they believe were suicide bombers. Local reports claimed that the airstrikes killed children. The problem is you can't really verify it either way because, frankly, we don't even have diplomatic missions in Afghanistan anymore. It's pretty much on the word of whoever's making the claim at this point. Anyways, but yeah, if we were able to get information on those bombers, you could assume that we had information on the other ones, but who knows at this point? It's all speculation, really. Another question here from Linda Battleborn, and good to see you here. You said, Josh, I read where the Vax passport will expire in 6 months. Does that mean people will have to get a booster every 6 months for a new passport? Well, it's not quite clear just yet. It seems to be the way that this is happening with the vaccine passports and the mandates is that they're not really telling you what the next stage is. So there has been talk in the United States of mandating, in addition, at least with the vaccine passports, mandating the booster shot as well. Meaning that if you get the vaccine, the efficacy of it dies off after, say, 6 months, or even sooner than that technically. And then you need a booster shot to keep it effective. And it's unclear whether this is an indefinite thing or a temporary thing, or for how long you need those booster shots. But we do know the efficacy of the vaccine does die off, and so there has been talk, at least about the need for it. Some of the heads of these companies, like the Pfizer CEO and these other CEOs, they have been talking about the need for a booster shot in order to make the vaccine basically serve a use to make it effective. In terms of the vaccine mandates tying to this, I think in the United States, the focus right now is getting people to take the first vaccine, at least for government, in terms of government policy. They want people to take the first vaccine. And so if they were to start mandating the booster shots right now, in addition to the first vaccine, a lot of people who've not taken the first vaccine would be like, yeah, right. What, you want me to take this for the rest of my life? Why would I need to take it if it doesn't frankly work after a few months? I'd rather get the virus and have like a 99% survival rate, and then, have the antibodies which are more effective and more robust. A lot of people just take that approach. In terms of them mandating it, Israel now has begun mandating the booster shot, but it's unclear because they're only saying 3 shots for it. It's unclear that whether in another 6 months they're going to mandate another booster shot in order to keep your vaccine passport valid. They're not stating the next step. Very likely they're going to have to watch and see where things happen, or they know it and they're just not telling us. But they're not saying yet what the next step will be. Currently, though, in the U.S., they're not pushing that. In Israel, they are mandating it. Another question here from Cameron Bacon. He said, Josh, how are you liking Schools Out with Sam Sorbo? Oh, yeah, I'll get into that in a minute. So he said, I've been encouraging many friends and acquaintances to check it out and strongly consider homeschooling. We must starve every institution infected by communism. Yeah, so, real quick, so we have a new show called Schools Out with Sam Sorbo. Sam Sorbo is the wife of Kevin Sorbo. Hercules. Remember that show? You might know Kevin Sorbo too. He's pretty active on Twitter. He's one of the louder voices on there, louder conservative voices. So Sam Sorbo is actually a big advocate for homeschool, and she started a new show with Epoch Times on Epoch TV called School's Out with Sam Sorbo. It's technically a show for homeschooling parents, but it's more like school, like parental education on how to do homeschool. If you're interested in homeschooling, she gives some great advice on there on how to basically run a homeschool for your kids. An interesting shift has been taking place in the U.S. Now, keep in mind that the Department of Education is actually fairly new. It's new. It was only started, I think, in the 70s or 80s. I can't remember the exact year. The Department, I believe the 80s. Department of Education is fairly new. And the idea of homeschooling is very popular in the United States. So I know of some parts of Europe, they actually don't allow it. But because of people doing essentially homeschool during the COVID-19 outbreaks, the CCP virus outbreaks, where they had the stay-at-home things for schools and they're bringing it back again in some areas, a lot of parents were getting more accustomed to homeschooling over this past year. And I believe the number of homeschooling parents in the United States is now around 10%, which is incredible. You got to think 1 out of every 10 kids is homeschooling in the United States. It's fascinating stuff, right? Now, Sam Sorbo has this new show helping parents who are interested in learning about homeschooling. And there's a lot of questions parents have, where do I find the curriculum? Does it take, I don't have time for it. It's actually not as much time as you'd think. And there's a lot of assets out there that are a lot easier to access than you think. And so her show is meant to kind of give that to people. If you want to check out that is on Epoch TV. And yeah, you said we must starve every institution infected by communism. Yeah, I'd agree. And the Department of Education, especially the teachers' unions, have really shown a pretty strong agenda in that direction, especially with this new critical race theory educations. Another question here from Burger Cool Wilm. He said, did you read about a law in Australia where law can get into your social network and change it? I didn't see the details of the law in Australia, but yeah, so Australia did put into place these new really, really intrusive social media laws, these new intrusive data laws. Now, in terms of getting into your social network and changing it, stuff like that's been at play for a while. So the CCP does that actively. The Reddit CEO actually did that a long time, several years ago. It's very bizarre. It's a super bizarre story, one which I don't think anybody really talks about. Long story short, with the head of Reddit, when this happened, basically users had found a subreddit on cannibalism called r/cannibalism, and they linked one of the people on there talking about cannibalism to the head of Reddit. And then after they found that, the guy started going into people's posts and changing their posts, and then claimed that it was like eliminating hate speech. And then they locked that subreddit, which was a really creepy subreddit. It was a super bizarre chain of events, super bizarre. And I don't think anybody really talked about it, other than the head of Reddit saying, oh, people are saying mean things about me online. And so I went into their accounts and changed their comments. On this, I'm saying that this type of behavior has happened on social networks where they're able to change your posts. Now, in terms of using this for censorship, I'm not sure if Australia is doing that. I do know they put this into place really intrusive social media laws just recently that are raising a lot of concerns over privacy. But in China, this is a common practice, this censorship without your knowing it, basically where they can change words as you're communicating with people. They're also talking about doing that in the United States, even to the point where they're talking about censoring SMS messages, meaning if you're texting, just using your text message on your phone. Let's say you're texting your mom or your grandma, and you're telling them about information you learned online about the virus or treatments you believe that may work. They're talking about censoring even that. And so they are working on censoring even that level of communication. All right, folks, do one more question here, and then we'll go into some more stories. Let's do a couple more. All right. Let's see. This is from Cameron Bacon. He said, Joshua, could you share with us a little about Epoch Cinema? Stoked about that. You weren't kidding about making the Freedom Netflix. Yeah. I started watching Interview with the Antichrist. Humbling beginnings, but it's good. Yeah. So we've just launched Epoch Cinema. It's part of Epoch TV. And there's a few sides to it. Basically, we're kind of partnering up with content creators. We're looking for people who have content, documentaries, movies, shows. Some of it's going to be Epoch TV exclusives. I'm going to be doing a lot more special features is the plan. And we have a lot of other channels doing the same thing. We're also looking to start producing some of our own stuff. And we're building up a lot of our own shows and also buying movies and so on. But we also have a rental service now. You mentioned one of the shows, or one of the movies, Interview with the Antichrist. I believe it's a Christian film. It does look interesting. I haven't watched it yet, but we do have it available for rent on Epoch Cinema. And so Epoch Cinema is like the video platform we have on there. So, if you go on Netflix, you get movies and so on. We're doing the same thing. We're going to have movies and rentals and all that. But we also have the news element to it, where we have news shows and news programs. Actually, we have a 24/7 news channel as well through our partner media, NTD, which actually Crossroads and a few other shows broadcast on in many parts of the U.S. and other countries around the world. Yeah, it's humble beginnings, as you mentioned. We're still trying to get content on there, so there's not a ton on there yet. We have some free movies as well. A lot of them are older movies, like the old Sherlock Holmes movies and His Girl Friday. Actually, one of my favorite classic movies. If you've never seen it, it's actually very funny, even though it's a pretty old movie. So a lot in the works there, and what you see is just the beginning of it. We're really going to start building it out, and it's moving pretty quick. Another question here from Crazy Morp. He said, "Josh, do you think we should start a Go fundraiser to get watches for the families of the 13 families that Biden couldn't be boring enough with?" Oh yeah, I think you're talking about it's a very unfortunate incident. Basically, and I believe this we're talking about. Basically, when they were bringing the caskets home of the American troops who were killed in Afghanistan in the recent suicide bombing as we were leaving the country, the caskets of American soldiers were being taken out of these planes, and there's a photo of Biden looking at his watch, and a lot of criticism for it because they're like, it looked like he wanted to get out of there, and people took it as being very disrespectful. And so it's unfortunate, honestly. All right, let's see here. Let's go into some more questions because I'll do one more real quick. And it's Dave Johnson. He said, "Josh, why did the Taliban release the ISIS prisoners?" Yeah, that's the $1,000 question right there. Why did the Taliban release the ISIS prisoners? If the Taliban wants to make sure that Afghanistan doesn't fall into terrorist hands. If the Taliban is promising to help stop terrorism, why would they release thousands of ISIS fighters from the prisons? If the Taliban is fighting ISIS, as we've been told, why would they release thousands of them from the prisons? Especially because these are people who are going to be threats internally in Afghanistan. Now, it's all speculation at this point. One possible answer to that is, well, there's a lot of, they might have just gone in there without thinking and just released everybody because that's just what they do. They might have gone in there and released ISIS fighters because their personal relationships, and you're going into a tribal country where a lot of people know each other. You're going to have Afghan army soldiers who are friends with the Taliban, the same people they were fighting. The ties between these people are very tight typically. It could just be that they're friends they wanted to release from prison, or it could be something more nefarious. It could be that they wanted to release them because they knew that these people would cause trouble, and it would essentially draw the fire away from the United States. Controlled burnings. If you want to stop a fire, you typically do controlled burnings, right? You stop a fire by starting a fire. Controlled burnings. In other words, let's say that the spread of the Taliban was one fire, and the U.S. was about to respond to that. What do? They light a second fire. And that diverts the U.S. attention to the terrorists. ISIS is not the terrorists. Taliban is not the terrorists. They're fighting the terrorists. And America should work with the Taliban to fight the ISIS terrorists. You see how that would work? Of course, this is speculation. It could be any of these three possibilities. It could be something else entirely that we're not taking into account. But again, it's all speculation at this point. when it comes to their intentions. All right, folks, that says, going to a few more stories for the night. I'll go briefly over this one, talking a bit more about China, because the Taliban right now, as we mentioned, is talking about how China now is their main partner. And now a Chinese envoy is accusing the United States of suppressing China. And this is as Beijing, the CCP, is pressuring Washington, the United States, to play by the CCP's rules. And this is going to be interesting on how they position themselves with this. It says here, China's new U.S. envoy accused Washington of continuing an extreme China policy and warned the United States not to cross the regime's red lines. Now, I won't go over the whole thing because this is a bit long, but when they talk about not crossing the red lines and not offending hurting the feelings of the Chinese people, these are phrases and very calculated terms the CCP uses. When they talk about not offending the Chinese people or things that hurt the feelings of the Chinese people, what they mean is hurting the feelings of the Chinese Communist Party by calling out the CCP's abuses of the Chinese people. The red lines for the CCP are the no-go topics. So this is democracy in Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong democracy, the separate, the protest for democracy in Hong Kong. That's one no-go topic. Taiwan independence. Taiwan is a self-governing country. It's its own country, frankly. The CCP claims ownership over it, but that's a no-go topic for the CCP. You talk about that, they're going to get up and walk out of the room. Persecution of Tibetans, persecution of Uyghurs, and the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners. Those are the 5 no-go topics in China. And so what the CCP tries to do with diplomatic relationships, it says you cannot criticize the Chinese Communist Party of its human rights abuses. You can't talk about genocide. You can't talk about slave labor. You talk about any of these things, they get up and they walk out of the room. In other words, if you're going to work with the CCP, you have to tolerate genocide, you have to tolerate human rights abuses, you have to tolerate slavery, you have to tolerate all of that. And if you talk about any of this, they say you're hurting the feelings of the Chinese people, and they get up and walk out. Which is very telling when it comes to think about all the different businesses working in China. Because if they start talking about these things, they're going to make these companies apologize. And you think about how many of these countries working with the Chinese Communist Party, they're trying to preach to us here about America's history of slavery, while many of them are directly engaged in slavery and are directly engaged in regions where you have actual genocide taking place. It's a bunch of nonsense, basically nonsense talking points that has no meaning for these companies, because they're engaging as we speak with a genocidal regime that is using, as we speak, slave labor, and they don't care about it. Nike, Hollywood, all of them are engaged with the Chinese Communist Party in some regards. Look at Disney working with the CCP and even thanking the authorities in Xinjiang in the film Mulan. These are the companies trying to preach to you about these things while they're engaging with a country, while not even bringing these things up as it's happening as we speak. And so this is the way the CCP is trying to play this game right now, with diplomacy as well. We have seen the United States take a stronger stance on calling out the Chinese Communist Party for its human rights abuses. The CCP is now calling out the Chinese Communist Party for genocide against the Muslim Uyghurs, and many other countries are stepping forward to call them out as well for that. We're sanctioning them for things like slavery of the Muslim Uyghurs. There's even some sanctions now against CCP officials for persecuting Falun Gong practitioners. And Falun Gong is like Chinese yoga. It's like truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. It's like people trying to be good people. 70 million to 100 million people persecuted, live organ harvesting, torture, re-education through labor, you name it, happening as we speak. And so we'll see what happens on whether the U.S. folds or continues to call them out. The trajectory right now is calling them out on it. And just briefly as well, actually, Epoch Times was the media that broke the story on the CCP's use of live organ harvesting, using political prisoners and prisoners of conscience as living sources for organ transplants. Horrifying stories, the details of which would make it, the details of which are horrifying, frankly. If you want to learn more about that, we had the first articles talking about it at Epoch Times. There's a couple books. One is called Bloody Harvest. Highly recommended checking it out. Let's see now. So I'll go into a few brief stories because it's getting a bit late. Right now, the House so this is in the United States. A House committee is now paving the way for the military conscription of women, and this is important because there's possibility of a new war, folks. Let's just be honest. The U.S. is positioning itself, really focusing more on Russia and China. The CCP is trying, as we speak, to get the U.S. involved in 4 separate wars. They're talking about, again, a new terror war, fighting against ISIS. A House committee now is talking about making it so that women have to sign up for the draft. Now, this was not included in the end, but they're paving the way to try to make this happen. Let's go into it. It says here, after scuttling an amendment that would have effectively suspended military conscription, the House Armed Services Committee took a 180-degree turn on September 1st by voting to expand the draft to women. The decision came late in the markup of the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, with lawmakers voting 35-24 to pass a bipartisan amendment by Representatives Chrissy Houlihan, a Democrat, and Mike Waltz, a Republican. And they said this is according to the Democrat. It said, women make up over 50% of our population, and not including them in the selective services is not only a disservice to these women, but also to our nation as a whole. Now, this was, if you go back to 2016, this was a meme when people were making Hillary Clinton posters and they were saying, draft our daughters, essentially. They were jokes at the time, kind of jokes rooted in some degree of fact because they were talking about it, but they're now pushing for this, making women sign up for the draft. Now it says, there was a proposed NDAA amendment that would have put the selective services system in limbo, but that proposal was scuffled by the HACS before the HASC started its markup. Anti-draft activist Edward Hasbrook told the Epoch Times that the amendment was ruled out of order. So this is not going through, folks, due to what he called arcane PAYGO rules, which prohibit legislation that increases the deficit. Through those rules, though those rules contain numerous exemptions, the HASC did not respond to requests for comment by press time regarding why the amendment was killed. So in other words, they're trying to push for it. Now, that said, a few more stories to go into. Let's talk about what's happening real briefly with the January 6th commission. Again, the Democrats have established a commission in the House of Representatives to investigate January 6th. Whether you call it, it's the great walkthrough of the Capitol building. Even in terms of the charges and people who have been prosecuted, they're facing charges for things like trespassing, not attempted overthrow of the U.S. government or something like that. We'll see what comes out from this eventually, but currently it's trespassing charges and things like this. But the House of Representatives has established a committee to investigate this, and as part of that investigation, they sent letters to almost all the major social networks requesting them, mandating them to provide a lot of different data to them on their users, on conversations, and things like this. But there's an interesting development now that McCarthy is now saying that if these companies actually comply with the Democrats on this, that they may lose their ability to operate in the United States, that these companies may actually violate U.S. law if they comply with the Democrats on this committee. Now, important sub note, technically the committee is bipartisan, but the 2 Republicans they brought onto it, basically Republicans had recommended to, Nancy Pelosi shot them down, and then appointed the ones she wanted, which were Republicans who had voted with the Democrats to impeach Trump. In other words, it's bipartisan, but they're all of the same conclusion on the nature of the January 6th incident. Now it says here, social media and telecommunication companies that turn over information to House Democrats would be violating federal law, the top Republican in the lower chamber said Tuesday. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, again a Republican, decried efforts from the House Intelligence Chairman, Adam Schiff, a Democrat, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, and Representative Benny Thompson, a Democrat, the chairman of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, to obtain records from companies including Apple, Gab, Parler, and T-Mobile. And he said this. So it's not just social media companies, it's even your phone company, it's even websites like the Donald.win and others. Now, this is a quote. It says, Adam Schiff, Benny Thompson, and Nancy Pelosi's attempts to strong-arm private companies to turn over individuals' private data would put every American with a phone or computer in the crosshairs of a surveillance state run by Democrat politicians. Now, this is McCarthy saying this in a statement, so this is his assessment. He continues stating, if these companies comply with the Democrat order to turn over private information, they are in violation of federal law. So these companies may violate federal law, he is claiming, if they comply with the Democrat order. He says they're in violation of federal law and subject to losing their ability to operate in the United States, leaving the door possibly for you to even sue these companies if you believe that they have given your data to this commission. We'll see how this goes forward. And he continues saying, if companies still choose to violate federal law, a Republican majority will not forget and will stand with Americans to hold them fully accountable under the law. And in 2022, the Republicans actually do have a strong chance to retake at least the House of Representatives. In fact, even the Democrats are saying this. And in fact, there's been a lot of reports on this. I won't go too deep into it. But even the Democrats are saying that they have a strong risk of losing control of the House, mainly because of redistricting, regardless of anything else, where states like California and New York have lost House seats, and states like Florida and Texas have gained House seats because of people moving. It's going to be very interesting to watch going forward, but he's basically saying that if Republicans do retake at least the House, that the Republicans, when they control it, are going to go after these companies if they comply with this order. That, again, these companies, T-Mobile, Apple, I mean, pretty much every major social media, even some more Republican-aligned company, I guess they're technically companies like the Donald.win websites. They're trying to make them comply with this data handover, which could compromise the data of American citizens, as McCarthy is alleging. And if they do this, he's saying that Republicans, if they regain the House, which they have a strong chance of, they're going to hold these companies accountable for it. It's going to be very interesting to watch. Now, it's getting late, folks, so I'm going to call it a night. Just one brief update. You might have seen the new video from Project Veritas, a investigation organization, news investigation organization. James O'Keefe runs it. They had a new video out that was interesting. They have a teacher admitting on undercover camera, on a hidden camera, that he's basically, well, in his words, indoctrinating students under trying to radicalize them, that he has an Antifa flag on his wall. He used his own money to get stamps made of individuals like Stalin, I believe, and Mao Zedong and stuff like that, and was stamping students' papers, and talks about in the video how there was a students were unhappy about his Antifa flag hanging on the wall, and he criticized the student, at least one of them, stating something along the lines of, that flag represents anti-fascism, and if you have a problem with it, then you should, reassess your beliefs, essentially. Well, it was interesting to watch how this unfolded, because initially the school district seemed to be defending the teacher, allowing this kind of, in this teacher's own words, radicalization of American students. But that individual now has been fired by the school district. It's an interesting story as it unfolds, and interesting to watch how Project Veritas has been exposing this. Again, the radicalization within the U.S. school system done by the teachers and teachers associations. A lot to go into, folks. Again, always a lot of stories to talk about. I'll be doing these live Q&As every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, so be sure to tune in. Quick update. So next week, I'm going to be traveling again. I'm going to be at a film festival in Texas, where Crossroads has been, they're going to be giving us an award. Very nice of them. It's the Content 2021 conference, I believe. And so big thanks out to them. I will be on the road. I'm going to have to figure out how to do the live next Thursday. If I might have to skip it. We're going to be doing a webinar, another live Q&A the Wednesday before. And so that we might just move it. I'll talk to my producers. Maybe we can find a way to make it still happen on Thursday, but I'll keep you updated on that as we go forward. But again, every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, almost always, we do the live Q&As in very rare cases, but we'll see you again next week. whether we can still do it on Thursday, but we are going to be having the special Q&A webinar on Wednesday. I'll keep you all updated on the details, and I apologize, we have to change things up a bit. But yeah, Crossroads got an award. It's very, very nice of them, and I'll show it to all of you when we get it. All right, folks, that said, appreciate all of you. Always enjoy doing these Q&As. If you want to support Crossroads, again, we do have a donor box account. You can find that linked in the description below. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting us, you can tell a friend or family member about Epoch TV, because that's hopefully the future of video news. And who knows, maybe our Netflix solution, but with some morals thrown in there. All right, folks, always a pleasure. That said, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.